A dancing ghost raise interesting questions about the afterlife. And then we touch on Bigfoot one last time this week when we explore the mystery. Are aliens turning us into the Bigfoot? Today on Dead Rabbit Radio. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. I hope you are having a great day too. It's Friday, unless you're listening to this on any other day where it wasn't uploaded, and then it's just a great day, hopefully, in general. This is going to be our last episode for the week. We're really blazing through these things. We're on episode 180. This is awesome, guys. I really appreciate all the support you're giving the show. Been a crazy trip, guys. Thank you for listening. If you're a new-time listener, welcome. If you're a long-time listener, thank you for coming back. It's always a pleasure to be telling you these crazy stories. Now, earlier in the... I didn't get to this because the episode was running a bit long, and I edited it out for time. But we're talking about the Miley Cyrus thing. I'm not going to go back into Miley Cyrus in general, but this is a little conspiracy theory that I've had. Do you think... It's a little thought game for you guys. Do you think there is a real Hannah Montana out there? Not as in that fictional character. But, you know, I did that episode on what's the scariest movie ever made, the hypothetical movie that no one's ever seen that's out there that's not been released to the public. I did an episode on that. This is kind of along those lines. So we're going to set up some ground rules. I'm asking, is there a possibility there is a real Hannah Montana-esque person out there? And this is the ground rules. 1, an A-list celebrity that people in the world know, but outside of their immediate family, so in their neighborhood or at their school, nobody knows that they are the A-list celebrity. They have to be A-list, too. Can't be making some direct-to-DVD movies, which as cool as those are, I'm not knocking those, but it's not like they're making some direct-DVD movies for some horror company, and then no one at work knows that they do that. I'm not talking about that. They have to be A-list is what I'm looking for, because that's who Hannah Montana was. She was an international pop star. Everyone knew who she was. 2, no porn. Because a lot of people in the porn industry do keep that secret. So that's kind of a given. A lot of times you'll have porn stars that are very, very well known, but people close to them don't know it. So those are really the 2 ground rules. 1, no pornography, and 2, they'd have to be an A-list star. I'm talking, and this is really, I came up with this idea a couple of years ago. Let's take a guy like George Clooney. You have him, and he's a super recognizable actor, but in his real life, his family knows that he's George Clooney. But he also has a quiet life where he goes shopping, and it would have to be consistent, not just putting on a fake mustache to go to the grocery store. He has an alternate personality that most of the people that know him personally do not know that he is George Clooney at all. For a period of time. That would be 2 more rules, I guess I should add. It would be, or another rule, for a period of time. So not just for a weekend, like for a couple years. Do you think that is possible? Do you think that it's possible that you could have somebody who is a Ariana Grande or a Brad Pitt, and the people, their family knows, but the people around them, they have a job, like maybe they're an accountant. Maybe they just walk around town all the time and everyone knows them as Joey Pumpkin or whatever, just a totally different person. And they've never made the connection that is really Brad Pitt. Do you think that's possible? I think it was possible, more possible a couple years ago before the explosion of social media, but maybe not, because I think people would cite them. That was always, Hannah Montana was always basically a little girl's version of a superhero, where her superpower was being famous. It was basically the story of Spider-Man. She was a teenage girl that got picked on at school, and she had a close group of friends who knew her secret, and her family knew her secret. I guess that Spider-Man didn't have those things. Well, the Avengers are his friends, but you know what I mean? Like, she would face the trials and tribulations of high school and get picked on and bullied and have to go through all this stuff. And her superpower was the fact that she was very wealthy and very famous. It was a really interesting twist on the superhero genre. That's really who Hannah Montana was. That was basically a superhero show. She just solved emotional problems rather than fight crime. But begs the question, do you think that it's possible? I think it's possible. The question is anyone doing it? I guess is the better question. Do you think right now anyone is doing that? Feel free to comment, shoot me an email. We'll have a discussion. But I think it's an interesting story nonetheless. So let's go ahead and get started with our first story here. Now, it's funny because our first story, it's one of those stories that I basically read a version of and thought, oh, that's kind of cute. That's kind of sweet. And then I read the more realistic version of it, and I was like, And then that made me think of some more interesting ways to look at how it concluded. So the story I heard was there was a guy named Grancer Harrison. And Grancer was an old-timey word for grandpa. Grancer, can I get some candy? Why, yes, young lad. That was a term. It means grandsire. It's really, really old school. Grancer Harrison was from Alabama. We're in the 1800s, like the mid-1800s. He loved throwing parties. He had this giant dance hall constructed, and every Thursday night he'd throw on his wooden clogs and his fancy dress suit, and he'd hire people to come out and fiddle, and they'd make music, and everyone would just dance all night long. It was his favorite thing that when he died, he said, I want to be buried in my dancing outfit with my clogs, and I want to dance for the rest of time. So they did. They humored him, and they buried him in his beautiful dancing outfit. It wasn't like a ball gown. It was probably just like, a dude's dancing outfit. Probably had lots of sequins. But anyways, they dressed him in his dancing outfit, put him in his clogs, buried him. And to this day, people say in this area, which I should have said earlier, the area is... I didn't write it down. But anyways, it's somewhere in Alabama. That's real specific if you want to go find this ghost. But the rumor is that if you go somewhere in Alabama, an unnamed location in Alabama, you can hear fiddle music playing late at night in the graveyard, and sometimes at his old dance hall, which actually he was buried near. He was basically buried on his property next to his dance hall. Sometimes when you're out there, people are like, dude, Alabama's a really big state. We're not going to find this place. But if you're just randomly walking through Alabama, you might hear fiddle music. And I thought, that's kind of a cute ghost story. The guy's like, he really loved something, he was passionate about something, he passed away, he wanted to experience in the afterlife, and it came true. Even to this day, he's dancing somewhere in Alabama. So that was the story that I heard, and when I went to go online to get some links to share with you guys and do a little more information, I got a little more details, and I don't know why some of it slipped by me in the beginning. One of the points is super obvious, but it went by me. So let's go back here real quick. Okay, and I looked it up. It's in Kinston, Alabama. Kinston. So if you do want to go find his ghost, you no longer have to roam the entire state of Alabama. So, here's some of the details that were left out of the charming version I heard. And again, the first one is kind of a no-brainer. Grancer Harrison was a wealthy businessman, wealthy enough to build a music hall for his own parties. So that was kind of given with the first story. He's a wealthy person. He lives in Alabama. And it's the mid-1800s, so he had a ton of slaves. Now, again, when I first read the story, it didn't connect with me that a wealthy man, not just any wealthy man, he was a wealthy cotton farmer. I guess I should add that detail in. That was all left out of the original version, but being wealthy in the 1800s in Alabama, you most likely had slaves. But being a cotton farmer, you definitely had slaves. And not only did he have slaves, he went all out. He loved the whole slave thing. He had 1/3 in the county that he was in. He owned 1/3 of the slaves. He's like Pokemon. He's got to catch them all. That's a ton of slaves. He owned 1/3 of them. So he goes, I want to build a dance hall. Make the slaves do it. So the dance hall that everyone had parties at was constructed by slave labor. So that kind of makes the story a little less charming. I don't know if the musicians were slaves. I don't know if the slaves were forced to dance as well. I'm not for sure on any of that. But they did construct it. He did hold the dance parties. He's a historical person. And there's still ruins out there in Kinston, Alabama. See, I remember. They build the dance hall. And the story goes on as normal. Except now there's slaves everywhere. So the original charming story, now every part where the little kid's like, Grancer, can I have some candy? There's enslaved human beings standing around. There are people who've been pulled from their families and are now slaves in that story. Here you go, here's some candy. Terrible. So anyways, he does say, I want to be buried with my dancing clothes on so I can dance for the rest of time. I didn't actually say for the rest of time. He just goes, I just want to be buried in my dancing clothes. And he wanted his mausoleum built, and he actually wanted to be buried in his bed, too. So we're talking it's going to be a big structure. Slaves. Make the slaves build it. So the slaves build this giant structure for him to be buried in. And they do. And they take his bed when he dies. They don't do it while he's still alive. He's like, I can still breathe. And they're like wheeling it into the vault. After he dies, they put his bed into the mausoleum. Put him in his nice fancy dancing clothes. Put on his good wooden clogs, his dancing shoes. Seal the door. And after he died, people still kept going to the dancing hall in his memory. But without him, it wasn't the same. The place eventually fell into disrepair, and it kind of is no more. It's ruins now, or it might just be a foundation. But his grave is still there. His above-ground grave, like a mausoleum. To this day, people can still hear music in Kinston, Alabama, fiddle music, and the sound of good old Grancer Harrison dancing in his clogs. Now, after reading about all the slaves and the slaves having to build the dance hall and the slaves having to build the mausoleum, I have another take on this story. What is the most uncomfortable activity that you could do for the rest of time in wooden shoes? It'd be dancing. Or running track. Or walking up a flight of stairs. But you know what I mean? Like, that doesn't sound like a pleasurable experience. To dance until the heat death of the sun and the planet Earth is destroyed. That sounds quite the punishment. So, here's my theory. Yes, he didn't want to be dressed in his dancing clothes and his shoes because he loved dancing so much, but when the slaves were building that structure, I have no proof for this, but as the slaves were building that structure, what if they put a curse on it? What if they basically cursed that structure so Grancer would spend the rest of time dancing in his shoes? And that fiddle music, as jaunty as it may sound, even though it's coming from some sort of astral plane and leaking into our dimension, the phantom dancing in that field, he's not happy. Just tears of pain streaming down his face. Now, I don't know if any of that's true, but I do have to say that I think if I had to choose between walking into a house and seeing a ghost staring at me from the corner, or a ghost walking down the stairs, or a ghost dancing, looking at me with wide eyes as it's dancing a jig, one of those things is far more terrifying. That would be, okay, forget the ghost thing. Let's say you walked into a McDonald's and you saw someone standing at the counter, but they're staring directly at you. You looked and you saw someone coming down some stairs. This McDonald's is 2 stories for some reason. Or then you turn and you see someone staring at you dancing a jig. Which one would be more terrifying, ghost or not? I don't think Grancer is having a lot of fun in the afterlife. Oh, and I do have to say they thought, like 100 years later, people thought there was gold in his grave and they blew it up with dynamite. So, I mean, his ghost apparently is still dancing even though his bones got scattered all over the graveyard. Okay, and I guess say there was no gold. They just blew it up. So, let's go ahead and move on to our next story. Now, our next story is interesting, and I don't want to do too much Bigfoot stuff this week, but this one I kind of mentioned on my Vanishing Bigfoot episode, where I talked about Bigfoot aliens or something more chilling. And I thought I was going to save this. I was like, no, I'm going to just wrap up the week with this because I already kind of referenced it. And I think it's a very interesting story. If it's true. If it's true, which is always the caveat. This is a recommendation from Bennett, again from email. He did the Vanishing Bigfoot one as well. It was kind of just a Bigfoot-centric email. We're looking at the theory that Bigfoots and aliens are connected. So you get 2 cryptids for the price of 1. You get 2 creepy things that want to get you for the price of 1. And I was reading this article, and there was a couple sightings they can piece together with the Bigfoot phenomenon. 1888, it's Humboldt County. It's not full of marijuana or marijuana farms or mysterious disappearances because a lot of people go missing up there. And most likely it's because they're stumbling across illegal marijuana. Do they still grow marijuana illegally? Or can you just grow it in the forest now? I don't know. But anyways, this is in Eureka County in 1888. This trapper is talking to these Native Americans and they go, oh, you want to see something weird? Which generally you shouldn't. If someone says you want to see something weird in your middle of the woods and you don't know them, it's not a good idea. But he goes, and the Native Americans take him to this cave and there's this huge hunched bear sitting in a cave, like cross-legged, Indian style. But the trapper can see that it's not a bear. He sees that it's some sort of creature, not necessarily a bear. And the natives go, 3 crazy bears were dropped into the woods. A couple days ago, these moons came from the sky and dropped them off. Dude's like, what? Now, that's the end of that story, so I'm a little suspicious, because you think he probably would have poked it with a stick or shot at it or something, but according to the story, then they all just kind of walked away. And they described it as being a big humanoid with long, black, shiny hair and no neck. Now, that's just starting us off, and I'm not going to list all of them. There are a lot of encounters where we have UFOs and Bigfoot in the same area. And a term has actually been coined for this. It's called high strangeness. The idea of high strangeness is this. Nothing exists in a bubble in the paranormal world. You will see crossovers between things that we didn't think there was any crossover between, i.e. aliens and Bigfoot. You can have areas that may have UFO activity and ghosts. That's not quite unlikely. We don't hear a lot of reports of that. I think it's because, why don't we actually have reports of those two things happening in the same spot? Because high strangeness is the idea that these things all have some sort of connection that we don't know about yet. But why is there not a place that has a bunch of UFO sightings and ghosts running around? It's interesting. That's interesting to me, at least. But I never really thought of that before. But we do have a lot of connections between aliens and Bigfoot. We have a lot of connections between... There's the theory that demons are actually aliens. There's places where you have alien activity, and then they'll have like portals and all sorts of stuff. Like the pyramids would be a good idea of a high strangeness area. There's there's like curses and free energy and all sorts of weird stuff. Like you can put a bunch of theories into the pyramids. Who built them? It's a conspiracy, all that stuff. Kind of high strangeness. We know who built them, but I mean, okay, how we built them, but all of that stuff. But yeah, I wonder why there's not ghosts and UFO sightings like there. Anyways, okay, so there's a lot of UFO sightings, though, that involve Bigfoot. People seeing objects in the sky and then a Bigfoot being found in the area. Objects flying near the ground, like this mother and this kid saw a, like, orb flying by, and then, like, a Bigfoot jumped out. So, I mean, like, what's going on? But there's a lot of reports of that. There's a lot of reports of that type of stuff. What I want to look at specifically is one report in general. Now, this one's interesting because I think it may have another answer to what Bigfoot is. But you're going to have to go on a journey with me. A journey to Fayette County, Pennsylvania. The year is 1973. 3 years before I was born, I'm still on the tree of life, just a fruit, ready to be picked and dropped into this mortal plane, but at this time I don't exist. But these people do. These people have all been born already in this story. It's nighttime. There's a group of 15 people in Fayette County, Pennsylvania. I don't know what they're doing. Just hanging out. 15 people at night. I don't know. Probably not up to no good, or maybe hunters because they also had guns. So they're out in this area and they see a large illuminated orb floating above a pasture. These 2 7 to 8 feet tall figures begin walking around the orb. Now, there is quite a distance between, there's a couple hundred yards, I believe, between the group of humans, and then there's a fence, and then about 25 yards behind that is the orb, and they're seeing these people. So I think it was like 200 yards to the fence, and so on. But they see, it's so bright, they see these giant tall figures walking around it. So these guys with guns open fire. Because what else are you going to do when you see some sort of bizarre event and giants walking around? You're going to open fire. None of the bullets hit them, but they did find out later that their bullets were hitting, at least 1 or 2 bullets hit the fence in front of them. So they were at least aiming in the right direction. One of the creatures, one of the giant 7 to 8 feet tall monster men, touches the other one on the shoulder. The light disappears. And the 2 creatures begin to walk away into the forest, and they're still getting shot at by these dudes. Don't even care. They just walk away very slowly. One of the group runs to a house to call the cops because they don't have cell phones back then. Cops show up, and the first thing they realize, other than the fact that there's 14 guys out there with guns just had completely just open fire. They could hear the gunfire. People were like, what in tarnation is going on out there? Why is everyone shooting their guns? They get there, and the area at night where that orb was and where the people are is completely lit up somehow. One of the cops said I could have read a newspaper out there. That's how bright it was. Even though now the orb was completely gone, somehow that light was still lingering in that area. The group then decides, with the cops involved, we need to get to the bottom of this and find out what those things were. Could be the Russians. So they start moving around, and they start to notice some weird things. One, there's a barn farther down on the property, and as they're getting closer to it, just lights up for a brief second, as bright as the sun, they said. Not as hot, because then the barn and the planet Earth would be destroyed, but as bright as the sun in the barn. They could see all the light just appear in the barn, and then, once again, the barn was pitch black. They noticed there was a bull. This was an odd detail. There was a bull and a dog in the field, and the bull and the dog weren't paying attention to the humans. They were instead staring at the forest. I was like, I don't know how bulls normally react at night, so that detail really didn't do anything for me. But what happens then is that somehow, and this is where the story gets a little suspicious to me, but let's just keep going on with it right now. The person also called some paranormal investigators. Some paranormal investigators also showed up at the scene that night, which, that's a little weird. I mean, I don't know if they're just driving around in their weirdo wagon looking for, like, bizarre stuff, or have a police scanner, and they're like, we just cornered Freddy Krueger, get to the corner of 8th and 9th Street, and which would be a very odd designed city if there's a corner of 8th and 9th, but you know what I mean? Like, somehow they get to the site. Sounds a little convenient for me. It makes me think that it could be fake. That's all made up. But anyway, so these paranormal investigators in their weirdo wagon show up, and they start interviewing one of the guys as all this stuff is still going on. They're like, what did you see in the beam of the light? Were they Sasquatch or were they Bigfoot? Was it a Yeti? And the guy's like, I don't know, it was a giant monster in front of a giant light. Anyways, this is the interesting part. They're interviewing, and you know what, now that I think about it, the story is probably made up. Like, it's one of those things, like, I'll write notes. I think people think I have a script for this show, and I think I need to put a quash on that right now. None of this stuff is scripted. I'll write notes. I'll read about it, I'll write notes, and then a couple days later, I'll do an episode. And sometimes when I'm reading a story, I'm like, that is fascinating. And then once I start reading it, I realize that there's some serious problems with this. But anyways, let's just keep going. Let's just keep going with this. So anyways, the weirdo wagon shows up. These paranormal investigators are like, tell us what you saw. Tell us what you saw when the bright light appeared. And this guy starts going, and starts like growling like an animal. So, I mean, come on. Anyways, he's growling like an animal. And the paranormal investigators and his buddies are like, dude, what's wrong? What's wrong? And they're kind of freaking out. The dude's own dog actually gets so scared of what this guy's like freaking out. His own dog tries to attack him, and then he goes, and the dog runs away, scares the dog. So the paranormal investigators are like, whoa, this is a little out of our league. He starts running off into the crazy guy now, runs off into the field, screaming. And everyone else is like, what the hell is going on? And the dude just collapses. Ugh. So the group goes over there, and they help him up, and they immediately smell the rotten eggs. Okay. They immediately smell rotten eggs, and then he gets up, and he goes, what happened, man? And they're like, you don't remember? You were just making a bunch of animal noises and ran away and scared your dog. Fell down. He's like, all I remember is seeing visions of a horrible future. Mankind is doomed. The world is going to end. And that's kind of the end of the article. So when I told you the paranormal investigators showed up just out of the blue, this article is from, I should have put 2 and 2 together, guys. I'm sorry. This article is from their website. And then it says there's even more craziness. And then you have to buy their book. So I'm sorry for not doing my due diligence on this one. I was so entranced. This was, okay, even when I started this episode, 30 minutes ago, the intro, my idea was that what if aliens are turning humans into Bigfoot people? And this is how. He was in this is how I was thinking. He was in that area, and he got starting to turn into a monster. And what's the first thing he wanted to do was to run away. Why did he want to run away? Because he was in a state of panic. He was having these visions of mankind destroying itself. Here was my theory, that Bigfoot are actually people who have been genetically engineered by aliens and driven mad to avoid humans. And they get all, they somehow gain an extra foot and get all furry. But the crazy bestial nature of this guy, I was thinking like, whoa, what if Bigfoots are actually like bioengineered humans by aliens? And that's what I believed 30 minutes ago. But as I was going back over the story in my head, I'm thinking, it doesn't make sense that they showed up so quickly. And again, I should have figured that out. But I mean, this is my other thing. It's super easy to fake being insane. Let's say that I do a live stream of this show. I can easily go, okay, are you out there? Are you out there, ghost in my claw? Oh, and then just freeze the camera and then come back and be like, I don't know what happened, guys. I don't know what happened. I have a little more morals than to do that, and it would totally ruin my brand to pull something like that off. But it's very easy to do, and it's even easier to just make up and just to write it somewhere on a website and say, buy my book if you want to learn more stuff. But all that aside, I'm going to salvage this episode as best as I can. I do think that could be, I think that is a possible theory, that the Bigfoot is actually humans turned into these creatures by aliens or some sort of force. And what this guy went through would kind of mirror that. He's reverting to a bestial nature, trying to run away, and being told, having visions in your head that the world is going to end due to mankind. You would want to eschew everything mankind. And it explains two things. It would explain one, why there's not a lot of big feet, why they're so hard to find, why they can hide, bury bodies and stuff like that, because they're actively trying not to be found. And it explains stuff like people going missing in the middle of the woods and never being found. They are the Bigfoot. The person who goes missing in the woods, they send out all the search parties looking for him, and they're huddling in some cave and they're starving. They don't know what to do next. And then a white light appears in front of them and fills their heads with apocalyptic visions. The rescuers may never have found that missing person, but that missing person in a new body is watching them and hiding from all of us. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. Twitter is @JasonOCarpenter. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day, but I'm glad you listened to it today. Have a great weekend, guys.